Kuchner van Deventer, and it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague Samuel Simango, who's the manager for research data services here at our library services. Samuel comes from a legal academic background, and after completing his legal studies, he became a law librarian. He started working at Stellenbosch University's Library and Information Service in 2014, before moving into the field of research data management in 2017, when he was appointed as the manager for research data services. And since then, Samuel has been involved in several aspects relating to the governance, technology, and services associated with research data management at the university. His key interests are the quality control and compliance-related aspects of research data management. Right, over to you, Samuel.
All right, thank you very much, Krishna. I'd just like to welcome everybody to this session. Before we actually kick off the actual session, I'm just going to go through very quickly the results of the pre-session questionnaire. I'm going to share my screen for such purposes just now. As you know, most of you were actually asked to complete a questionnaire just before this session. As I indicated, this questionnaire was intended to actually influence or feed into this session. I'm just going to wait for my screen to actually appear on your side. Okay, and I believe that this is the case. So I'm just going to really briefly run through this so that you can actually get an idea of why this session will take on this uncertain format. It's meant to be a bit of a practical session, so it's a bit of a hybrid session, which actually blends certain aspects of traditional training as well as game-based learning activities. So you will actually get to play the game during the session, or at least the data management component. So if we just go through the results here, it's trying to see that the bulk of the attendees are actually students, and got a lot of representation from economics and management sciences. That's the largest crowd there. Not too many researchers, and that the idea was to actually assess whether or not she's going to a little bit of more detail about the aspects of the core aspects of data management planning based on the responses. And as you can see, a lot of the people are actually students in this case, so there's very little research experience, if we can put it that way. A lot of people indicated that they had not actually played serious games, but I think the questionnaire outlined what a serious game is. It's basically a game that's not solely focused on entertaining people, but providing some other kind of value. And in this case, that would be educational value. There are folks who are familiar with choose your own stories, or at least different types of games and stories, so you'll feel right at home in this case. But the game will be a bit self-explanatory, but for those who might not have a crystal clear idea, there will be a bit of a description about the game beforehand. It turns out that a lot of people are not necessarily aware of the existence of the game, about 76% of the attendees, or at least the people who completed the questionnaire. So I have to provide a bit more information about the game itself instead of just throwing you into the deep end. This is just about marketing purposes to see which specific methods were most effective in informing people about the game. And it turns out that only one of the people who responded to the questionnaire had actually played the game out of the 12 people who were actually aware of the existence of the game. And this person played it per level, and that's quite interesting because you can play the game in its entirety. It has about 5 levels. It takes about, on average, an hour to play, but we won't play the entire game today. We'll actually just focus on the first level itself. And then there was a question about the Rdm regulations. I will explain why this is actually included here, because it ties into the data management provisions that govern data management planning at the institution. And it was interesting to see that a lot of the attendees were not necessarily aware of these regulations. Those who were aware of it had at least read it to some degree. About 77% of those individuals had read the relevant provisions. So this leads me to believe that I should at least canvass this, even if it's very briefly during this session. And then looking at what data management planning is, turned out that about roughly over 50% of the attendees knew what a data management plan is. Research is funded in various ways. This can influence whether or not you'll be mandated, or at least by a funder, to have a data management plan. But at this institution, in terms of the new Rdm regulations, all research projects should actually have a data management plan. Some funders do actually mandate this, and that's why I actually asked the question for those who actually saw this question, depending on your previous answers. If there were at least 49% who are required to create a data management plan. So I figured, well, let me just explain what a data management plan is and how to create it for the benefit of those who don't actually have to create data management plans based on funder requirements. And then there was a question about whether or not people have actually created the plans. All of this, all in all, it showed me that there is a need at least just to flesh out a bit more detail about data management planning instead of just having a pure session about the actual game itself. So in terms of the structure, what I'll do is I'm going to have a short presentation about the game and then short demonstration of the gameplay itself. And then we'll go into playing the actual first level of the game. And then, so you'll actually play it individually. It's not like you'll watch me play it. You'll get a chance to actually play it. And then afterwards, then we'll regroup. And then I'll give you a bit more information about what we'll do after that. But essentially, we'll have 2 gameplay sessions. And then we'll obviously record the scores in that case. And then we'll check the progress based on what you actually learned during the session. So the idea is to play the game in order to learn something. And so without further ado, I will now switch over to the first presentation that I'm actually going to give, which is basically a short description about the actual research data management game. So I'm going to provide a synopsis of the aim of the game, describe the gameplay, possible use cases, and then provide you with a demonstration of the gameplay before we jump into playing the game itself. Before starting off, I should just point out that this game represents a collaboration between the University of Bath and Stellenbosch University, primarily with regards to their academic libraries. The game itself is actually a text-based role-playing interactive fiction series game based on the data management challenges of a research project. The game takes the form of an online choose-your-own adventure format in which game players take a simulated research project through the following processes: data management planning, data collection or generation, data organization, data description, and research publication, while encountering data management challenges along the way. The game was developed as part of a collaboration, as I pointed out, between Stellenbosch University and the University of Bath, and was developed between 2017 and 2020. It was launched at the University of Bath in December of 2020 and at Stellenbosch University in March of this year. Early on this year in January, the Wellcome Trust Early Career Researchers Advisory Board endorsed the game by including it in the Wellcome Open Research Early Career Researchers Pack, recognizing it as a useful tool for researchers. And then just recently, the Open Research Funders Group, that's the ORFG, endorsed the Research Data Management Adventure game by adding it to the list of resources on the organization's Policy Implementation Tools webpage. It is worth pointing out that the ORFG's membership actually consists of several reputable research funders that you can actually see on the screen right now. Now, in terms of the aim of the game, the objective is to demonstrate and teach good practice in research data management and to assist researchers in understanding good practices related to research data management. All right, so as I was mentioning, the specific learning outcomes focus on the following aspects: data management planning, designing participant information sheets and consent forms, choosing appropriate equipment for research projects, acquiring suitable third-party research data, organizing research data, storing research data appropriately, analyzing and documenting research data, preparing research data for archiving, and publishing research data. So if you look at the screen, you'll see that by playing the game, you're sort of exposed to the tip of the iceberg. But in terms of what you're actually learning, it's core aspects about data management planning, data literacy, and data archiving, all three of which are core components of research data management. The audience itself is primarily postgraduate students as well as early career researchers and academics, and that's why I'm thrilled to see that we've got the core target audience attending this session. But anyone else who's actually interested in understanding how research data management works on a practical level, for example, research support staff, could actually find this game to be quite helpful. The game itself takes players through different stages of the research lifecycle, presents them with a data management challenge, and allows them to make decisions that affect the success of their research project. Players progress either by making straightforward binary choices or by completing puzzle-like options. In the process, certain challenges test the effectiveness of the decisions made by the players. The tone of the game is lighthearted in order to maintain its entertainment value, despite it being a serious game. Now, since the game simulates the entire RDM lifecycle, the repercussions of decisions that researchers make can be experienced in a safe environment, permitting them to make mistakes and hopefully learn from them without suffering the associated real-life consequences. As such, game players can opt to play the entire game or can select to only play specific stages of the RDM lifecycle. And as I indicated previously, our focus will be only on the first phase of the lifecycle. Well, I'm not really going to go to the details of how the game could be used, other than say that's for virtual training or interactive training, and we're opting for the interactive training session today. Now, the game is not just restricted to Stellenbosch University and Bath University's, or rather University of Bath's researchers. It's actually a global game, and anyone with internet access and who can understand English can actually play the game. As of yesterday, the game has actually been accessed by 740 players across 48 countries. As you can see from the stats there and the map showing you where the players originate. All right, so without further ado, let's actually jump into an actual quick demonstration. I'll try to keep it short. Okay, so what I was stating is that this is the game's landing page. Users would be prompted to either resume an earlier game or to start the game from scratch. In this case, I'm going to start a new game, and I'd recommend that you do the same when you actually start playing the game later on today. You have the options of playing as a qualitative or as an experimental researcher. This generally makes a difference if you're playing the entire game, but for the purposes of the first level, it really doesn't actually make a difference. What I'll do is I'll select to play as a qualitative researcher in this case. So what you notice is that then you're prompted to either go through a quick introduction of the game or to jump straight into the game. Since I actually want to show you a demonstration of the game mechanics, I'll actually opt to go through the introduction, which is essentially a tutorial of how the game works. Now, what I was explaining while I was muted is that you have different types of links that are presented on the screen as you play the game, and they actually serve different purposes. The first type of link that you see on the screen here is a link that allows you to cycle through different possibilities. So if you click on this link, you'll see a different option. If you click on it again, you'll see another option, or you can click it again, go back to the second option. And at the bottom of the screen, if this is the case, you'll find a link that allows you to fix that choice. So I'll select that and then move on to the next page. So you see that the game notices that you've actually selected the first option, and that's indicated on the next screen. Now, there's a different type of link that you can actually see as well that you'll see on this page, which actually expands the text that's actually visible on the screen when you click it. So if I click here's one, you'll notice that the text that's actually visible is actually expanded, and that allows you to actually read some more information. Now, further down the web page, you'll notice that there are two links, take and leave, next to a certain item. So this is like a menu. It's actually a buffet. Now, in the game itself, you will not be presented with a food menu like this, but as I indicated, this is just a demonstration. The idea is that you're able to select certain options and to leave them. In this case, I'll take the first three, just for demonstration, and I'll leave the last three. Now, what you notice is that the choice is not necessarily fixed. You can go back to change it, but in order to do that, you need to refresh the web page. So I'll refresh the web page, And once the page is refreshed, what you'll see is the options reappear again. In this case, I'll take everything except for the fruitcake. Now, once I'm satisfied that I've actually made the right choices, then I can click on the link at the bottom, seeing that the choice is fixed, to move on to the next page. And you can see that a list of the selected items is included. Everything is there except for the cake. Now, this then brings up the next type of links that you'll see. These are links that really make it difficult to tell which option is the most correct one, just to make the game slightly tricky. And in this case, you can look out of the round window in this example, in which case you'll see a geodesic dome, or you can look out of the square window, in which case you'll see a tower block, or you can look out of the triangular window and you'll see a pyramid. But it's not really obvious which one of those three options is the most correct one. I'll leave that up to you to find out for yourselves as you play the game. So now moving on forward, you can see that it is possible for you to check your score. As you play the game, your score will be tallied up and it would actually be reflected down at the bottom of the screen. Since this is a demo, you won't actually see any score because we're not really playing the game. But if you do actually decide to click on the link, the score link, you'll actually see your score as well as the maximum possible points that you could have accumulated up to that point. Now, points are either awarded positively or negatively, meaning that they're subtracted, or sometimes you don't get any points at all for certain options that you select. Now, if you're satisfied with the score that you've seen, you can go back to the game by selecting on Resume Playing. It's worth noting that at the bottom of the screen, your progress throughout the game is actually noticed. So if you're playing the first level, you'd notice that the first dot would actually be black, and once you get to level 2, you'd have 2 black dots right until you get to the end of the game. This is something that you should keep in mind as you play today, because we're only playing the first the first level. So if you wind up with 2 dots, then that means that you've gone way too far in the game. And your ranking will actually change based on how well or poorly you're actually performing. In this case, since this is just a demonstration, there's no ranking that's actually assigned to the player. It's also possible to restart the game. You probably noticed that that's what I did once Kirk notified me that I was muted. But I won't click this again right now because that will undo everything that I've done up to this point. But you are able to do that and restart the game whenever you want to, or restart the level whenever you want to. It just means that you'll start again from scratch. Now, let's go on to the next page. Now, there are 2 other things that I want to point out now. Or rather 3. The first one is that it's possible to go back to actually change certain decisions that you've made or to undo certain things. So you just click on this arrow here to go back, and this one here if you want to go back further. And if you want to go forward, you select the arrow, the forward pointing arrow, the redo arrow, so to speak. But it only takes you as far as the point that you actually left off from. So you can't just click that to go forward if this is the point where you left off. But you can go backwards, obviously. Now, as you play the game, you might find that you'll see some text that has a blue dotted underlining. And in such case, the underlined text is actually defined. So in this case, Jabberwock is a defined term. So if you were to click it, you see the definition for a Jabberwock, which is basically a mythical creature invented by Lewis Carroll, often pictured as a particularly grotesque dragon. If you want to exit this pop-up box, you click OK, and you go back to the game. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that the game is an online game, so it can actually be saved in a browser, provided that you decide to not clear your cookies. You can actually come back and play the game later on in the future. I'm just going to give a demonstration of that by copying this URL. Going to close this window and then go back to the game. And what you'll see is that I'll be prompted to either start a new game or to resume an earlier game. What I'll do in this case is I'll resume the earlier game, and you'll see that I'll be taken right back to the page that I left off at. And then that brings us to the last decision. And this has to do with whether or not you want to actually play the game in its entirety or you want to select certain levels. So if you want to play the game in its entirety, then you start from level 1 and play all the way up to the very end. But if you do want to start from, let's say, level 3, you're free to do that, or start from level 5. And that's pretty much it in terms of the actual demonstration. So what I'm going to do now is just ask for the link to actually be shared in the, what do you call it? Oh, the link has already been shared by Kirchner. So I'd just like to invite you all to actually then have a look at the game. And I just want to point out that you should play the game until you get to a page that looks like this. Essentially, this is the very last page. So you have your score that will be indicated, and you'll either get your money or you won't get your money. If you proceed beyond this, you'll actually wind up on the next level, and that's not where we want you to be. As you can see, that's level 2. So once you get to the end here, what I'd like for you to do is to click on the score, and that will actually produce a breakdown of your score, as you can see in this case. So I just like rushed through the game before the session, and that's my score. The maximum is 20, and I got a 14 out of 20. And this is what I want you to keep in mind. I'd like for you to at least take note of that score. And then what I'd want you to do is to actually go into, I'm going to share a link to a gameplay scores questionnaire so that you can actually complete the score or indicate what your score was. So in my case, that would be a 14 out of 20. And as I say, we're going to play the game a second time during a second gameplay. And then in that case, the idea is to also record that score. So without further ado, we can actually jump into that. It's estimated that this gameplay session should take about 10 to about 15 minutes. I'll probably just ask that if you are done playing, that you raise your hand within Microsoft Teams just to indicate that you're done playing the game. And when everyone's hand is up, then we can assume before the 10-minute time period, we can assume that everyone's done and then jump back into the session. If there are any questions, you can just unmute your mic and then you can feel free to ask the question. Here is the link to the actual scores questionnaire survey. So without further ado, you can actually go into the gameplay. You're not going to watch me play it, but you're going to actually play it individually. So you've got 10 to at least 15 minutes to play. I've noticed that a couple of people have finished thus far. We're just going to wait for about 5 more minutes for everyone else to finish. For those that have finished, can you please just use this link that I'm sharing here so that you can actually capture your score on the Games Play score sheet. It's completely anonymous. There's no way I'll be able to know who it is, but we just actually want the score. Just another announcement. I think I forgot to mention that when you do actually complete the questionnaire, just save and return later to it as opposed to submitting the complete form.
Samuel?
Yes?
There's just 1 or 2 questions here for you.
Yeah, sure.
The first one, are we supposed to submit the first score or wait until we have finished the second session? I'm guessing that's the first score that you have to submit because you're only supposed to do the first session. And then there's a question, how do I save and turn back to it?
I presume this is in reference to the actual questionnaire. So if you have a look at the screen now that I'm sharing, if you complete it, there's an option to submit or to save and return later. So what you do is you simply save and return later. And then you'd only submit when you've actually completed the second one, for instance. So you can leave the web page open and then come back to it. If you don't want to save it, you can just like fill it in later and then submit completely. Because if you save and then return later, it's possible that the page will actually close out. So the simple option could be to just complete the first one and then to leave the second one until afterwards. Hope that answers the question. All right.
I see she says here she meant the game itself.
Oh, if she wants to close the game and come back to it later on. It's pretty much simple. Remember, the game is saved within the browser, so you can actually close it off as long as you don't clear the cookies for your browser. you can actually close the browser and open it again. If it's the same one, so if you're using Chrome, then you need to return back to Chrome as opposed to Bing. So use the same browser and don't clear your cookies, and then you can actually restart the game. It would be safe within the browser itself. All right. All right, so that's about 16 minutes worth of gameplay. I see that there's some people who are still playing. We've had about 29 people who responded. Maybe I can, 29 people finished it. I don't want to rush people, so I'll just give you like a few more minutes, and then we'll actually have to continue with the rest of the session though. All right, I'm just going to give everyone about 2 more minutes, and then we'll actually have to carry on with the rest of the session, unfortunately. I see that there are about 44 attendees the session. If you exclude Kirkland and myself, that's 42, and we've had at least 31 people who've actually finished playing the game thus far. All right. Okay, I think that's as far as we can go. So now what I'll do is I'm going to just minimize this. Now, thanks a lot for going through that game and for completing the questionnaire for your scores. We're not going to go to the score sheets now. What we're going to do is we're actually going to go through the second part of this session. Now, as you played the game, you would have noticed that there was a certain point in time where you were prompted to either go for some advice to, I think, the research division or the library. There's certain sources, various sources that you could actually consult for information. So this is probably sort of like dropping a hint in this case. What I'm going to assume is that you actually opted to go to the library for consultation or for information in that case. So the next part here will actually be a data management planning consultation that tries to simulate the kind of information that you would receive from a librarian. So in this case, I'll play the role of librarian Sam, advising a student or researcher about data management planning at Stellenbosch University. So this will probably be a short session, and this will probably give you some insight on what the correct answers should have been during the actual game, or what the correct options should have been. And then after that, you'll go back and then play the game a second time, and then we'll see how your score is actually affected by the consultation. My hypothesis is that the score should actually go up, but I stand to be corrected. I guess we'll find out. All right, so what you need to keep in mind is that, and I'll go into a bit of detail because from what I realized at the beginning is that most people are not necessarily familiar with data management planning. Data management planning exists within the broader context of the research data management planning, the research data management life cycle. It's actually the first step in that life cycle, as you can see from here. Now, first thing that we should look at is defining data management planning. Data management planning, as you can see from the screen, is a process during which researchers describe the manner in which they plan to manage data during and after the research process. Now, in actual practice, data management planning should occur during the planning phase for research projects. So as you can see, it sort of like exists within the context of another life cycle. That's the research grant life cycle. Takes place during the pre-award phase. So as you actually submit your grant application, you should actually submit your data management plan along with that, especially if funders require that. If it's not a funder requirement, then you just create the plan so that it can actually guide you in terms of how you manage your data during the rest of the research process. Now, data management in practice, like in actual practice, the process of data management planning is facilitated through the use of data management plans. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that further on. Now, a data management plan is actually a priori description of how data will be handled both during and after the research process. data management plans should be updated throughout the study as plans change, which is normal in life. Data management plans are actually created and submitted to research funders as part of grant applications, as I indicated previously, or they are created in order to assist researchers with the management of their research data, even if grant applications are not applicable. Now, there are certain guidelines, or at least core requirements for data management plans, which actually outline what should actually be covered in a data management plan. As you can see on the screen, I won't go into the nuts and bolts, but just briefly outline that you need to describe the manner in which your data will be collected or reused if it's data that already exists. How the data will be documented and how you actually manage the quality of the data during the research process, how the data will be stored and backed up during the research process, any legal requirements or ethical considerations that need to be taken into account. You need to cover how the data will be shared and how it will be preserved in the long term. And then one also has to address who will actually be responsible for the data management plan itself. Now, what you would notice is that there are, or at least you won't notice it immediately, is that there are some research funders who actually provide their own templates to facilitate the creation of data management plans. Now, what you see on the screen here is actually a list of certain funder requirements. This is taken from the tool known as DMP Online. It lists certain funder requirements, and you can actually find that there are templates available on their platform. And a different tool here, DMP tool, also has funder requirements that are actually available. So if you click on the links, you'd be able to download the funder requirements if they are actually available. Now, data management plans can actually be created by using data management planning software. The example that you see on the screen here is actually known as Data Stewardship Wizard, and it has a smart questionnaire, as they call it, that allows you to actually complete the information that I referred to previously in order to comply with the core requirements of a data management plan. So what you'll find is that a data management plan ends up serving three purposes. It is a planning document, a procedure manual, and a historical record. I actually want to show you an example of a data management plan. I thought that it would make sense, instead of just talking about it, to actually show you. So here's an example of a fictitious data management plan. I guess we're in the realm of fake things, or at least we're playing a fictitious game, so I might as well use a fictitious DMP. This is part of what I call a make-believe project. So it's a project that I just created for demonstration purposes. But the details of the project are here in terms of the date of the project, when it will start, when it will end, who the funder is, that's make-believe or funder, etc. But the details have to be included in the actual plan itself. The only thing that's probably real here is my name. And then what you'll see is that the plan actually describes the various aspects relating to the project, such as how the data will actually be collected, how the data will be documented, and what type of metadata schemas will be used, the types of ethical considerations or legal compliance issues that need to be taken into account, how the data will be stored and backed up, and then how the data will be preserved in the long term and shared if that would be applicable. And then who would actually be responsible for the actual management of the research data or the research project itself. So in a nutshell, that's what a data management plan covers, and this is what it actually looks like. So once you fill in the smart questionnaire in the example that I showed you, the end product would actually be a document that is generated, which should actually be the data management plan itself. And this is actually the document that will be submitted along with the grant application, or the plan that someone will actually keep on hand to guide them throughout the research project. It is possible to go back to the questionnaire itself and actually make certain changes as a research project itself actually progresses. Now, at Stellenbosch University itself, it's worth noting that data management planning is actually governed by the Stellenbosch University Research Data Management Regulations that were actually approved by the University Senate in November 2020. And from the screenshot here, you can actually see the first page of the regulations. Now, the regulations actually have an entire provision, section 17 of the regulation, which actually covers data management planning. Now, what the regulations cover is, in terms of data management planning, is exactly what a data management planning is, who needs to create a data management plan, what needs to happen when you have collaborative research projects, when should a data management plan be completed, what role do data management plans play in the ethics review process. It's worth just pointing out that whenever ethical clearance is required, it's mandatory that data management plans be submitted to the relevant research ethics committees in terms of the RDM regulations. And then the regulations also outline how often data management plans should actually be reviewed. Now, if you go through the provision of the regulation, that is section 17, you'd actually be able to map out certain decision tree that actually informs you what course of action you should take if your research has actually been funded or if it hasn't been funded. As I pointed out, if the idea is to have data management plans for all research, it stands to reason that even if research is unfunded, a data management plan should actually be created. This is the path that will be followed on the left-hand screen if research is actually funded. And depending on whether or not your funder has a data management planning template, you'd either follow this path or you follow this path, which takes into account institution requirements if there's no data management template from your funder. There are certain resources that researchers at the university can use in order to find out some more information about data management planning. The first source would be the university's RDM web pages hosted by Stellenbosch University's library. This is a landing page of the RDM web pages, and you'll see that included as part of these web pages is the Planning and Managing Research Data web page, which actually has some information about data management planning, as well as the software that can be used, and links to the funder templates. Remember, I showed you some screenshots funder templates. You can actually access these by making use of the RDM web pages. Now, it is worth pointing out that at the moment, Stellenbosch University does not actually have its own institutional data management planning software, but this is something that is still in the pipeline. So for the time being, these two software products, DMP2 and DMP Online, can be used by researchers. But once our own institutional software has actually been launched, it will probably be more appropriate to make use of that platform in order to create your data management plans. The second source that you can actually use is a game known as the Research Data Management Adventure. Viewed from a specific lens, the game presents a fun way to teach researchers about how to plan the management of their research data. This would be useful to researchers applying for research grants, as it could assist them with the completion of their data management plans. The game has an entire level, that's the first level, that is dedicated to the application of research funding. Game players are tasked with writing up a data management plan as part of the grant application process. There are several options for how to approach this task. There are different possible outcomes, all of which depend on the quality of the data management plan which is being completed by the game player. The quality of the data management plans that can be created by game players varies. A player will only receive full funding if the quality of the data management plan that is completed is excellent. And that's pretty much it in terms of the consultation. So now going back to where we left off in terms of the actual gameplay, you'll notice that there's several hints that I dropped during the actual consultation. So upon consulting with the librarian, you can actually come back with a bit more insight about data management planning. Now, in such a case, this could allow you to either create a data management plan so you can actually submit, or just so you can use to manage your research project once again. So at this point in time, I'd like to give you an opportunity then to go back into the game and have another go at playing it. This time I'll cap it to about 10 minutes. I presume that it will take less time for everyone to actually play the game. So the time now is like 2 minutes to 3, so we can stop just before 10 past 3 in order to actually jump back into a feedback session. So you can jump back into the game. I don't know if any of you want the link to the game to be shared again, but if that's the case, I think Questionnaire has just shared it. So once you've actually finished playing the game this time around, you can then go back to the questionnaire and then enter the score that you got the second time. Right. And in this case, after you've entered that score, you can then submit the results. Can I just indicate by show of hands, if you've actually finished playing the game a second time around, can you just raise your hands up so that I can actually see it when I look at the list here? All right, so there's only 1 more minute and then the gameplay will come to an end. All right, so if anyone is actually wrapping up, I didn't want to rush you, but I'll actually have to jump back into the session now with everyone else. We do have several people that have finished the second round of gameplay right now. So I've actually had a look at the scores and the results are pretty interesting. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can actually see what I can see. All right, so I believe you can all see my screen. There are at least 35 people in all who played at least the first gameplay session. And not all the questions were completed, or both questions, not all of them were completed. So if we actually have a look at the final results, this is what I was trying to find. For the first gameplay session, what you'll find is that, interestingly enough, remember the maximum score was actually 20, but the highest values that I see here are 40, there's a 40, a 64, and 285s, which is beyond the maximum range. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there in terms of how people completed the questionnaire, but that literally skewed the results. So as a result, what you'll find is that what I was really interested in was the mean or the average score. For the first gameplay session, the mean was 22. So it's very bizarre that the average in this case, for reasons that I've just indicated, the average was higher than the maximum score that you can get for the actual level. But nevertheless, it's at 22. And for the second gameplay session, the mean was actually at 27. The highest values, once again, had 35, 39, 55, 56, and 85. All of these are above 20. In fact, I was not expecting to see anything above 20. It's basically impossible because the game only assigns less than 20 points. At least 20 is the maximum for the first level. So we shouldn't actually see these kind of numbers. So due to the manner in which the questionnaire was actually completed, the results were actually skewed. Now, I should point out that this is not necessarily for research purposes. I'm not necessarily going to publish anything based on this, but what I wanted to see was the average and if the average went up. So notwithstanding any errors, the mean was 22.6 for the first gameplay session, and it was actually 27.67. So we can still surmise that the average score went up during the 2 gameplays. So I would presume that the intervention of going for a data management plan and consultation actually had some influence in increasing the score. It could just be that people made better results, better choices when they played the game a second time, but I'd be inclined to presume that the consultation had something to do with it. So this is just something that I actually wanted to share with everyone. It would have been nice if all the scores were below 20 though. Now that brings the gameplay session to
Samuel?
Yes, Krishna?
If you look at the chat, I think some people thought it was in percentage, so they might have entered the score incorrectly. And then there was also a question, wasn't it out of 65?
Oh, no, it was out of 20. That is something that I had in mind. So the entire game as a whole is actually out of 100. So maybe I'll take responsibility for this one, but the whole game is out of 100. So when we broke it down in 2 levels, we decided that, well, the first level already assigns you 20 points out of the possible 100 either way. So the idea is that when you play the level on its own, you're only playing for 20. You can't get anything more than that, which is why at the very beginning when I gave that demo, I indicated that I got 14 out of 20. It's just maybe I thought about setting the linker chart to have a maximum of 20, but in REDCap, you can only sort of like explicitly set it to 100. And the option is if you remove the option of setting it to 100, you simply can't set any score. So you're forced to have it out of 100. But the main thing that I really wanted to see was whether or not the score went up in terms of the actual mean. Since this wasn't actually tied to each and every single individual, I wouldn't actually be able to see how everyone performed based on how much insight they already had about data management planning coming into the session, and whether or not they actually had played the game, whether or not their funders actually require data management planning, whether or not they'd actually gone through the RDM regulations. I wouldn't actually be able to view all of that. But as I indicated, this isn't really for study purposes. The main thing was trying to see if the average score would go up. And I could look at refining it further on in the future. This was the first time we had a session of this kind. So this pretty much brings most of what we went through to an end. Right now, I'd just like to open the floor for a feedback discussion. If there are any questions or any comments or any feedbacks, I think there is a feedback form that might be administered. Krishna, can you correct me? Is that correct? Is there a feedback question for this session?
No, not for the individual sessions, just an overall feedback form for the research week.
All right, then that's perfectly fine. Then I'd just like to find out from the attendees themselves what they thought of the session, what they thought of the game. I mean, you're free to obviously inform other users about it. If you found that also useful, please spread the word. But I want to see what your thoughts are so that we can see how we can refine sessions of this nature. As I pointed out, this was the first of its kind, and I'm really willing to hear any constructive feedback that you might have.
And Samuel, I assume you can, yes, participants can unmute their mics now if they want to engage.
That's correct. I'm not sure if the 3 hands have been raised to indicate now that you finished playing the game or you actually want to give feedback. So the first one on the list is Miss Stain. Do you have something to say? Okay, I think that hand went down or she logged out. Then there's Mr. A.V. Fisher. I don't know if you're raising your hand to say anything. Mr. Fisher, did you want to say anything? The next one on the list then is M.Y. Jarumbira. I don't know if you wanted to give any comments. People don't have to give these comments verbally. You can actually just type in your comments so it's not being forced out of you. But just basically opening the floor up to you instead of just closing the session without letting you have your say.
Hi, Sybil. This is Dr. Christopher Landis speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What my experience was, it was really like experience of how to adapt and go through this whole process of like the ethics as well and the data planning. So specifically when you're not doing it all the time, the game gave me like an idea of the process and of the steps to follow, and also giving me clear guidance of what to do. So I think for any researcher, definitely this game will be of great help, and specifically also for young researchers as well as the more established ones as well. So thanks a lot. I really enjoy playing the game and be part of the season. Thanks
a lot. Appreciate your feedback. The floor is still open to anyone else. I'm just reading the comments right now in the section. Someone say that they really enjoyed the session. It gave a lot of clarity about data management that they didn't have. Then Ms. J. Borcha pointed out that she found this interesting. There's another comment about how the game is engaging and a clever way of introducing one to data management. And all right, I presume there are no comments or any feedback or anything like that. So that in itself is perfectly fine, but I really hope that you did gain something of extreme value and that you at least be prompted to go and play the rest of the game. It wasn't possible to play the entire game. As I said, it's a 1 hour gameplay, and it's probably more beneficial when there's an intervention like the consultation that I sneaked into or that I incorporated into the session, as opposed to just having someone play the game. But you are free to play levels 2 to 5 right to the end at any given point in time. So if there's nothing else from anyone else, then I would like to bring this session to an end and to thank you all for attending this session. I really appreciate it. Right. Anything from you, Kirk, now, or is it fine to close it off? We're sort of like 10 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yes, I think we can. I'm not going to end the session yet because people seem to lose access to the chats then. So just so that they can have a look at the links here. But yeah, we can conclude the session. Thank you very much to you, Samuel. I think, yeah, I hope the news about this game is going to spread like wildfire. And presentations like this definitely should help do that. Right, thank you very much, everybody. There's one more day of Research Week left, and I hope to see you there tomorrow. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.